I don't talk about that night. Not because I don't want to, but because every time I do, I feel like I might bring it back. Like the carnival is still out there waiting for me to return. It happened 2 years ago on a warm summer evening. My boyfriend Ryan and I were driving back from a weekend trip when we saw something strange, a carnival in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't there before. We had passed this road on our way in, and it was just an empty field. But now, the Ferris wheel spun slowly, glowing in bright red and yellow lights. A carousel played eerie, muffled music, and colorful tents stretched out under the dark sky. "Whoa," Ryan said. "Where did this come from?" I stared in confusion. "I have no idea, but we should check it out, right?" Something in me didn't want to. Something told me this was wrong, but Ryan was already turning the car into the dirt path leading to the entrance. We stepped out, and I immediately felt off. The air smelled strange, not like popcorn and candy, but something metallic, something old. There were people, but they weren't normal. Their clothes looked outdated, like they were from the 1950s. A woman in a blue polka dot dress walked by holding a candy apple, but when she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely black. I grabbed Ryan's arm. "Let's just go, this place feels weird." He laughed. "Come on, babe, it's just a theme carnival. Maybe they're doing some old-timey thing for fun." A man in a striped red and white suit appeared beside us. I hadn't seen him approach. His skin was pale, too pale, and his grin stretched unnaturally wide. "Welcome to the Midnight Carnival," he said, tipping his hat. "You two are just in time for the final show." I forced a smile. We were just passing by." "Nonsense," the man interrupted. "You must stay. Our carnival is one of a kind." Ryan, of course, was already intrigued. "Do you have games?" he asked. The man's grin widened. "Oh, we have games you'll never forget." Before I could protest, Ryan was already walking toward a ring toss booth. The prizes were strange. Old dolls with cracked faces, antique mirrors, and rusted trinkets. He tossed a ring, and it landed perfectly on a bottle. The booth worker, an old woman with wrinkled hands and sharp yellow nails, clapped slowly. "A winner," she croaked. She handed Ryan a small stuffed bear, but the moment he touched it, his face changed. He went pale, his hands trembling. "Ryan?" I whispered. His eyes were distant. Let's go." I didn't argue. We turned to leave, but the carnival was different. The lights flickered, and the once bright colors faded into dull grays. The people moved slower, their faces twisted into eerie grins. Then the music stopped. Silence fell over the carnival, except for one sound, the Ferris wheel creaking as it turned. I grabbed Ryan's hand. "Run!" We sprinted toward the entrance, but it wasn't there anymore. The gate was gone, replaced by another row of booths and rides that weren't there before. "We just came from this way," I cried. Ryan looked around, panic creeping into his face. "How do we get out?" A giggle echoed behind us. We turned to see a little girl in a white dress holding a balloon. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "You can't leave," she whispered. Ryan dropped the bear. The moment it hit the ground, the carnival shifted again. The lights flickered wildly, casting shadows that moved on their own. The people, they weren't people anymore. Their skin peeled away, revealing hollow skulls and grinning teeth. The carnival was alive. Ryan pulled me toward the Ferris wheel. "If we get high enough, maybe we can see the exit." It was a stupid idea, but we had no other choice. We jumped into the nearest cart, and the wheel groaned as it lifted us up. From above, I saw it clearly. The carnival had no end. It stretched forever into the darkness. The road we came from? Gone. The field? Gone. And then I looked down. The carnival workers were no longer pretending. Their bodies twisted and contorted, their limbs bending at impossible angles. They were waiting. The cart stopped at the very top. Ryan held my hand tightly. "We're not getting out, are we?" I looked at him, tears filling my eyes. "I don't know." Then the wheel jerked. Our cart tilted, and before I could scream, we were falling. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the dirt. The field was empty. No carnival, no lights, nothing. Ryan was beside me, breathing hard. We never spoke about it. We never told anyone. But sometimes at night, I hear it. The distant sound of a carousel, playing just beyond the trees.
I have always loved amusement parks. The bright lights, the sound of laughter, and the thrill of the rides always gave me a sense of excitement. But after what happened to me at Riverside Amusement Park, I don't think I'll ever step into one again. It happened last summer when my friends and I visited an old amusement park on the outskirts of town. It had been there for decades, and while some parts were modernized, there was one section that felt forgotten. As we walked through the park, we stumbled upon an old ride called the Hollow Coaster. It was a wooden roller coaster, one of the first built in the park. The paint was peeling, the sign was faded, and oddly, there were no riders. The entire area around it was quiet, too quiet. A park worker stood nearby, and I asked, "Why isn't anyone on this ride?" He hesitated before answering, "This ride, it's not for everyone. Some say it's cursed." We laughed, thinking he was just trying to scare us. My friend Sam nudged me. "Come on, let's try it. If it's so cursed, let's see what the fuss is about." We climbed into the ride, the old wooden carts creaking under our weight. The worker hesitated before locking us in. He looked at me and whispered, "If you hear whispers, don't answer them." Before I could ask what he meant, the ride jerked forward. The first part was normal. The slow climb up, the click-clack of the chains pulling us higher. But as we reached the top, something changed. The air grew ice cold. My breath fogged up in front of me. That didn't make sense. It was the middle of summer. Then, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then, they grew clearer. "Help us. Let us out." I turned to Sam. His face had gone pale. "Do you hear that?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but where's everyone else?" I looked around. The seats that were supposed to be empty weren't empty anymore. Shadowy figures sat there, their faces twisted in fear. Their hollow eyes stared straight ahead. The ride suddenly plunged down. My stomach lurched, and the screams of my friends mixed with the wailing of the ghostly passengers. As we twisted and turned through the wooden tracks, I felt something cold touch my shoulder. A skeletal hand. I screamed, trying to shake it off, but it gripped tighter. Then the ride did something impossible. It took us into a tunnel that wasn't there before. The wooden walls closed around us and everything went dark. The whispers grew louder. They never let us off. They never stopped the ride. I could barely breathe. My heart pounded as the ride picked up speed. The walls around us seemed to shift, flickering between the old, broken ride and something much, much older, like we had traveled back in time. I saw flashes of something horrifying. The ride, it wasn't just abandoned. It had collapsed before, years ago. There had been passengers, and they had never made it off. The whispers turned into screams. I shut my eyes, praying for it to stop. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. We were back at the station. The worker stood there, his face expressionless. My friends and I stumbled off, shaking. Sam turned back to look at the ride, but the coaster was gone. The tracks, the carts, everything. It was as if it had never existed. The worker simply said, "Some rides never end." And that was the last time I ever set foot in an amusement park.
I don't go to amusement parks anymore. Not after what happened that night. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. My boyfriend, Ethan, and I had planned a short getaway, and when we found out there was a carnival in town, we decided to check it out. It wasn't a big festival, just one of those traveling fairs that pop up overnight, bringing with them flashing lights, sugary treats, and rides that creak a little too much. Ethan was excited, but from the moment we stepped in, I felt uneasy. The air smelled damp, like old wood and rusted metal, and the people around us seemed off. Not scary exactly, just wrong. Their smiles were too wide, their laughter too hollow. Still, I didn't want to be a buzzkill. "Come on, let's go on a ride," Ethan said, pointing to a roller coaster at the far end of the fair. It was an old wooden coaster, the kind that rattles when it moves. A faded sign above it read, "The Never-Ending Ride." I hesitated. Weird name, don't you think? Ethan grinned. "That's the fun of it. Let's go." We got in line. Strangely, there wasn't much of a wait. People ahead of us got in, but I never saw them get off. I tried to shake the thought from my mind. Our turn came. The ride operator was an old man with a wrinkled face and milky eyes. He didn't speak, just stared at us with a small, knowing smile as we got into the cart. The ride started. At first, it was normal. The cart climbed up, the chains rattling beneath us. Ethan raised his hands, laughing. I forced a smile. Then something changed. We reached the peak, and instead of the usual sudden drop, the cart just kept going. Higher than it should have been. Higher than the track even seemed to allow. The ground below stretched farther and farther away. I turned to Ethan. This isn't right." He looked just as confused. But before he could speak, we plunged downward. But instead of the track looping back toward the station, we were somewhere else. The carnival was gone. The lights had vanished. The sky was black, endless. The ride twisted and turned through a void of nothingness. Cold air bit at my skin. The sound of the coaster's wheels was deafening. But there was no other noise. No screams, no music, no life. And then I saw them. Figures stood along the non-existent tracks. People. Their eyes hollow, their faces expressionless. They reached out as we passed, their mouths moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. My stomach twisted. "Ethan, we need to get off." He was gripping the safety bar, his knuckles white. "How? The ride isn't stopping." I looked ahead. The track was bending into itself, looping in impossible directions. My chest tightened. This was the never-ending ride. I turned to Ethan, panic clawing at my throat. "Jump! What, are you crazy? We have to get off!" I didn't wait. I undid my harness and, with a deep breath, threw myself off the ride. The moment my feet hit the ground, I gasped. I was back at the carnival entrance. The laughter, the lights, the scent of cotton candy, it was all normal again. I spun around. The roller coaster was there, just as it had been before. The line was still moving. But Ethan wasn't with me. I ran back to the ride, searching the carts. He wasn't in any of them. I turned to the ride operator, my heart pounding. My boyfriend, he was just here. He was on the ride with me. The old man gave me a slow, sad smile. "Miss," he said in a raspy voice, "this ride's been closed for years." I stumbled back. That's not possible. We just got on." He shook his head. "People go on, but not all of them come back." I turned to the ride. The carts moved forward, passengers getting in, the cycle continuing. And then, in one of the seats, I saw him. Ethan. He looked at me, his expression frozen in terror as the cart climbed upward once again. And then, he was gone. The never-ending ride lived up to its name. And Ethan, he never came back.